And I welcome you all and thank you for joining us in these extraordinary times. Last year for World Koala Day, we actually did a nature walk. A lot of things have changed in the last 12 months, and right now there's obviously no group meetings out and about. Plus the weather isn't great, so a Zoom meeting for us is the next best thing. Also, obviously, welcome Dr. Desley Whitten, an ecologist from Deakin University with 16 years koala experience, and she will join me today in the presentations. Our group so far has grown to around 50 odd members and lots of volunteers, people that come to our group sessions and any group events that we're running. So that's fantastic. Community support so far has been fantastic. Just a reminder to please keep your microphones on mute when you join, otherwise there's too much background noise. Just in terms of our session today, so we are recording the session. We're recording the presentation. Please keep your microphones muted throughout. You can use chat at any given time to send questions or send messages. There's lots of time at the end to ask questions, so don't hesitate to send your questions through at any time. I will go first with sort of an overall presentation of what's going on the Mornington Peninsula. Desley then will talk about her project and her research project down here, and then I'll finish up with some more information about our group, and we've got lots of questions, question time at the end. So you can also welcome Martha on the screen, Martha from Arthur's Seat. That's one of the koalas, who I see very regularly in our backyard in Arthur's Seat State Park, pretty much. And there's lots and lots of photos throughout. Okay, well, let's make a start. So I hope you can all see the presentation on the screen. Look, why was the group started? Obviously, the group actually started with a Facebook group in 2017 because, koala populations are declining. The group became a land care group in 2019. We do know that the Mornington Peninsula koala population has been declining quite rapidly, and there's not a lot of data available in terms of its population size, the rate of decline. Some of our wildlife carers definitely talk about potentially a rate of up to 50% decline over the last sort of 10, 20 years. There's a lot less koalas coming into care these days. Why koalas and why orangutans? There's obviously a lot of parallels. They both rely on trees. They're both umbrella species that need a lot of habitat to survive. And obviously the idea is if we can save koalas, we will save a lot of other animals in the process. Male koalas, can need up to 1,000 trees to move around. They move around in massive areas. Obviously the fragmentation on the Mornington Peninsula is a problem for them. Land clearing definitely is not only a third world problem. There's a lot of land clearing still occurring in Australia. There's lots of koala groups around the east coast of Australia. Two that I want to name is Bengaluru Koalas in Byron Bay. Linda there is doing an amazing job, and she wants to plant 250,000 trees by 2025, which is just fantastic. And obviously Janine for the Koala Clancy Foundation in the Yuyangs. They're very inspirational people, and they've inspired us to do more and more on the Mornington Peninsula as well. Why are koalas declining? As you can see, 69% of available habitat is now on private property on the Mornington Peninsula. And the key reasons for decline are habitat loss and fragmentation. Vehicle strikes, dog and cattle encounters and diseases are also reasons, but the number one reason for the decline is habitat loss or just the heavy fragmentation. You can see in the right image, there's just little fragments of forests left. This picture is not a peninsula photo, but this is exactly what's occurring on the Mornington Peninsula as well. And then the animals struggle, obviously, to move between those fragments. Lots of roads and fences and buildings in between. And unfortunately, we're seeing less and less joeys on the Mornington Peninsula as well. So every now and then we do get a report. My heart stops every time because there's a koala with a joey that crosses White Hill Road in Dromana quite regularly. And I get reports every now and then. Unfortunately, no one has been able to get a photo of it yet. But my heart stops every time when I get a report of it being on the road. I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide in particular. So firstly, you may notice that I've cut off the Nepean Peninsula from Keppel Sound onwards. No offense to the people on the Nepean Peninsula, but I've done that deliberately today because there are no koalas on the Nepean Peninsula, but pretty much everywhere else. We get reports, from Frankston south to Langwarrin to obviously down to Dromana and sometimes even Keppel Sound area down to Flinders, Shoreham. Obviously, hotspots are in Somers, Balnarring, Red Hill and the entire center of the Mornington Peninsula, but we do get koala reports all over. Why did I choose the satellite image? Obviously, because you can see the fragmentation. So if, I know it doesn't quite work in this way, but if you think of the dark green patches as good, high quality habitat and the light green of paddocks and sort of shrubs, you can see the fragmentation on the Mornington Peninsula. So if you're a koala having to navigate, the roads and lots and lots of open space, it's obviously very, very difficult to move around. The other interesting thing is that our koalas on the Mornington Peninsula today, they're all originally from French Island. So you can see the dark, beautiful patches still of French Island koalas. Unfortunately, on French Island, they have the opposite problem to the Mornington Peninsula. There's too many koalas on French Island. But unfortunately, they will not relocate koalas to the Mornington Peninsula anymore because it's not deemed to have enough suitable habitat left to relocate koalas. So we have to look after the koalas that we have. I want to give an example of one of the male koalas that was picked up by a wildlife carer, by Jenny Bryant in Tyabb. About 18 months ago, or probably almost 2 years ago now, around the Esso refinery around Hastings. And it crossed the entire peninsula and then was clipped by a car on the Mornington Peninsula Freeway near Mount Martha. Luckily, only had a dislocated hip and he survived, but you can see that he crossed significant amount of land and crossed the entire peninsula, one koala. So they do, especially the males, they do move around a lot. Interestingly, when you look at this satellite image of the peninsula and you look at Somers, looks like there's not many trees left in Somers, but there's lots and lots of koalas in Somers. Obviously, coming over from Cerberus, moving through Somers to Coolart. So that area actually is a koala hotspot, and we do want to focus on that next year and see that we can increase the tree cover in Somers a bit. Pleasingly, just recently we've been paired up with Red Hill South Landcare Group. And we've just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, given away just, around about 700 trees to people, because there's so much demand for koala trees on the peninsula now, which is absolutely fantastic. And we had lots and lots of people from Summers who are planting koala trees. So that's fantastic to see. But we definitely have to do something about the fragmentation of habitat. You can see we obviously have some large green patches in Greens Bush and Arthur's Seat and around Devil Bend Reservoir, but they're not well enough connected. All the land care groups, they obviously run BioLink projects, the biggest one being the Greens Bush to Arthur's Seat BioLink that we're working on, but the fragmentation is, what is driving our koalas to extinction. I want to focus on those two blue bubbles on the side. So the tyranny of small decisions, I've chosen that phrase, which was actually coined by an American economist in 1966, because on the peninsula, we don't have large-scale land clearing. We don't have, huge areas of land that are cleared at the same time. But unfortunately, there's a lot of small decisions that are being made every single day. They are being made most of the time with the best of intentions. No one wants to cause any harm, but unfortunately, the tyranny of small decisions means that over time, those small decisions, a tree being cut down here or there, they make a big difference. And over time, it's also not that noticeable, in a year, but over a long period of time, you notice that tree cover is just disappearing. The shifting baseline syndrome is always interesting for me. I remember when I was a little boy growing up in Germany, you could drive on the freeway at night and your windscreen would be splattered in bugs. And when you get home, these days you can drive at night on the freeway and you don't get a single bug. And our kids now think that's normal. So there's this shift, this constant shift in the baseline of what people perceive to be normal. And people may drive down the Peninsula Freeway and, see how lovely and green the peninsula is. And they may perceive the paddocks and, some of the trees that are left as it's so green and it's so beautiful, and people don't know that over time there's more and more trees that are disappearing, and it just becomes the new norm over time. So shifting baseline syndrome is a real big problem in nature conservation, because what people perceive, as normal now, may actually not have been normal 10, 20, 50 years ago, and the decline in wildlife is staggering. So they're the two concepts that I wanted to talk about. It's just a different view of the Mornington Peninsula. So this is our green wedge, often talked about green wedge zone. And, what stood out to me and what's interesting to me is that people, when they talk to me, or, when I talk about koala conservation, very quickly they will say to me, why isn't the council doing more, and why aren't Vic Roads doing more? And while that's true to a point, and we all actually need to do more, when you look at this area, you can see that those dark green areas are public land. So it implies the rest of it is private land. So it actually isn't just the council or just Vic Roads or just it's everybody. Everybody on their properties, everyone who lives on the Mornington Peninsula has a responsibility to contribute. And we obviously try and do work with a lot of local landholders to revegetate their properties and to do work for that reason. Most of available koala habitat is now on private land. So there's only so much that can be done from a public space point of view as well. No doubt we can always improve our roadside, we can improve our parks and reserves, there's no doubt about it, but a lot needs to be done on private property. Most of the land for koalas is on private property. We do obviously want to preserve and restore the green wedge, connect the different parks again with biolinks. A lot of the thinking has been done. It's really just a matter of, getting our hands dirty and actually continuing the great work that's already happened. But there's a lot to be said about increasing tree cover in this area. You can see, for example, again, don't want to single out Somers today, but Somers itself is actually not part of the green wedge, but it's still equally as important that we plant trees in Somers. We know that there's a lot of koalas in Somers, Balnarring, Shoreham, sometimes in Flinders, but Flinders is too cleared these days. There's very little little bush left in Flinders. Okay, another view of the Mornington Peninsula. This is interesting to me. I'll refer to this graph a fair bit. Again, the perception is when you drive down the Peninsula Freeway that how lovely and green is the Mornington Peninsula. But when you do look a little bit closer, the canopy cover, the tree canopy cover on the peninsula is actually quite low. Frankston and Mornington Peninsula are quite similar. The Mornington Peninsula is just under 30% of tree cover in this study that was done by Sydney University of Technology in 2014. It's interesting. Again, perceptions are different, to the reality. What the other thing that's really interesting is that Melbourne City Council are actually working on an urban forest concept, and they want to increase tree cover in Melbourne City from what is currently 22% to around 40% in 2040. So we could end up with a scenario where, relative to size, Melbourne City Council has a better tree cover than the Mornington Peninsula, which is just really interesting to think about that. The good thing is that one of the ecologists from that I've spoken to in the past has told me that when you're sort of sitting around the 30% mark, anything you do will have a huge impact, and a huge impact. If we can even make it to 40%, 40%, technically is classed as a forest. And, we obviously have a lot better chance for any animals that rely on trees like koalas and a lot of our birds to survive long-term on the Mornington Peninsula if we can increase tree cover and just available habitat for animals. I'm convinced that we could plant millions, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of trees on the Mornington Peninsula, and no one would lose their view, or no one would be negatively impacted by them. There's lots and lots of space available, and generally it's, will and, awareness from people how important our local gum trees are. Talking about the importance of trees. So the key koala trees on the Mornington Peninsula are madder gums, swamp gums, and narrowleaf peppermints. Trees take at least around 5 years down here to grow to a size where they are of any interest to koalas. In some areas, it could be much longer. Some areas, they grow a lot quicker if there's easier access to water. But it takes a fair amount of time for a tree to get to a size where they have any interest for koalas. And more importantly, it takes around about 100 years for a tree to start forming hollows. And guess what? All our bird, or most of our colorful birds and tree-dwelling animals rely on hollows for shelter and for their nests. We need to plant the right trees down here. There's a lot of exotic trees being planted. And it's interesting, obviously we need to know our weeds and weed trees. I actually don't recommend to people to get into weeds, because once you then start walking to our parks and reserves, all you see is weeds, and it's depressing. But it's really important that what trees grow down here, and what weed species you may have on your property, and manage those weed species. And obviously, trees are important, and they absorb carbon. Climate change will have a very significant impact on our koalas. They really struggle when temperatures get over sort of 38 degrees. And also climate change during droughts dries out the gum leaves, and a lot of koalas actually die from kidney failure because they are not getting enough moisture through the leaves. They do drink, but they do take in a lot of moisture through the gum leaves. Obviously, trees provide shade, they lower temperatures. That's the primary reason why Melbourne City Council wants to plant lots of trees, to keep the temperature down in the city and sort of combat the urban heat effect that all the concrete causes on hot days. And they also retain moisture in the environment. So the answer to our threat of bushfires is not to cut down more trees, because we're drying out our environment and we are actually increasing the likelihood of fires. And for all of us, spending time in nature reduces stress and improves well-being. So there's a million reasons why we should be planting trees. And guess what? It's not only koalas that need trees. All our beautiful birds, as I mentioned before, need trees either for shelter, for food, or for the all-important tree hollows so that they can nest. And so do our sugar gliders and our tawnies, and our beautiful possums and owls. I'll break for now at this point, and I'll introduce Dr. Desley Wisson to give us an update on how the koala project down here is going. Thanks.
Thanks, Dirk. Might just take me a few seconds to get my screen shared properly here. So just bear with me while I do this.
Nice.
And hopefully everybody can hear me okay.
Yeah, it's really good at the moment.
Awesome. So can everybody see my title slide there? Or Dirk, can you tell me if it's showing all right?
Yes, it's good.
Okay. All right, so first of all, thank you so much, Dirk, for hosting this session and for all of the amazing work that you and your very big team of koala warriors are doing for koalas on the peninsula. I think it's really good to see such a great effort. And, when I started my projects in 2016, there was a small group down in Somers who were doing amazing work. So big shout out to Pam Bannister and the people in Somers for the work that they've been doing down there. So in my presentation today, I'm going to basically just give you a fairly brief summary of the research that my students and I have been doing on koalas on the Mornington Peninsula. And when I say the work I've been doing, it's really about the work that most of my students have been doing. So they've been doing, the lion's share of the work. So I'd like to take that opportunity now to thank Simeon and Ashley, who both worked on the movement patterns study down in Somers and Balnarring Beach, And more recently, Paula Rivera, who I know is in our audience today, so big shout out to Paula for the amazing work that she did for her honours project looking at distribution of koalas. And congratulations, Paula, on submitting your thesis. Lots of hard work went into that. And I'd also should thank all of those people who have helped us along the way. So a lot of community members got in on the act and helped us with field work or finding koalas. And just thank you to all of those people who have allowed us on their properties. And Jackie Salter really helped us a lot with the distribution study and linking us up with landholders. So thank you to all of those people. Right, so I'll talk about the movement pattern study first. And our aim here was really to understand how koalas use and navigate their way through urban areas. So this study was taken in and around Somers and Balnarring Beach. And we have just heard that our paper on this work's been accepted in the journal Landscape and Urban Planning. So hopefully I'll be able to share that paper with you soon. So the study started in early 2016, and over a period of a few months, we captured 20 koalas and fitted them with tracking collars with GPS units attached to those. So these are just small off-the-shelf units. We programmed them to record locations of koalas every hour, and this gave us about 1 month's worth of location data per koala. So we recaptured koalas at 3-month intervals. We wanted to make sure that the collars weren't bothering them, and it also gave us that chance to replace those GPS units. So for the koalas that were still in the study later in the year, we also attached a second GPS unit that recorded locations every 10 minutes. So this way we were able to get much higher resolution tracks for each of our koalas. So we recorded the condition of koalas, we checked females to see if they had pouch young, and we had a close look at teeth to work out, the age of koalas. And these were our beautiful koalas, and I should thank them for being part of our study and providing us with such wonderful data. They were all healthy. Mostly in older age classes. We had a couple of fairly old ones, and sadly we didn't record any young for any of those females over that 1-year period. So I know that females have been observed with joeys, so we know that they can breed on the peninsula, but it's obviously at a pretty low rate. So of these koalas, 3 died in the course of the study. Lulu was euthanized. She was actually quite arthritic, and so we decided that we needed to intervene there and put her out of that pain. George, we think, was about 15 years of age when we first caught him, and he died after we'd removed his collar. Somebody reported a koala with an ear tag, so we picked him up. So we presume he died of age-related causes. The saddest one of all, though, was poor old Waldo. He simply disappeared from our study, and he'd been in the habit of crossing quite a major road. He was there 1 week, and next week there was no signal. I already knew where his, regular haunts were, and we kept checking in on those locations. We did a door knock and we couldn't find him. So I'm assuming that he was hit and probably removed from that area, and we never recovered the collar. So we were pretty surprised by the data we got from some of these GPS units. So remember, this is our old fellow George, about 15 years of age, and in just 1 month, these points is where our GPS located him. So he's a bit of a mover, and you can see these clusters of points is where he really liked to spend his time, and he kept returning to some of those locations, and occasionally took a bit of a ramble through the countryside, only to end up back down at the yacht club at one of his favorite trees. So he's traveling quite large distances. There's only 1 hour between each of these points. So we know they're covering a fair bit of ground in 1 month. So we can take that data and turn it into home range estimates. So We can draw boundaries around those points and identify where those core areas are, which is shaded in this hash color here. And what we found was a koala could cover up to 153 properties in just 1 month. So they're moving a lot, and males on average have bigger home ranges than females. Now that in itself wasn't a surprise, but the size of the ranges were. So we know that in really good habitat where, you know, it's just continuous bushland, male koalas only need about 2 hectares of habitat. So what's happening here is they're obviously moving a lot more, either to find each other, because we know we've got a low density population, but more likely to find those good food resources. So this was a little bit of a surprise to us, and it made us wonder how much time these koalas are spending on the ground and at risk from people, dogs, cars, and all sorts of other things. So these are just a couple of tracks from our 10-minute data with the GPSs. We found that koalas would on average only spend 1 day per location. Some koalas, you know, might spend up to a week in some of the larger bushland areas, but for the most part, they were really moving a lot. So the size of the dot shows how long they were spending in one location, and you can see that for the most part, they're only spending between 4 and 24 hours per location. So this means that they're spending a lot of time on the ground, they're crossing roads quite frequently, so they really are at risk of dogs and cars especially. So what this told us was, and I think this is probably no surprise to anybody, that with koalas moving around so much and visiting so many locations, that to keep a population safe in an urban area, everybody has to be on board with conservation efforts. So that's maintaining current habitat trees, planting more habitat trees, and being really aware of koalas on the road. And it was a bit of a surprise to us that we only lost the 1 out of those 20 koalas on a road. And this may simply be because they're crossing roads mostly late at night, or that the Somers and Balnarring Beach people are very aware of koalas on the roads, and we know, you know, people are on the lookout for them all the time. So good job to those people in Somers and Balnarring Beach on keeping koalas safe there. So moving on to the second study, and this was Paula's study. So Paula, I hope I do a good job in presenting this for you today. And the aim of this was to determine the factors that influence the distribution of koalas on the Mornington Peninsula. And this is just a map of atlas records from 1920 to 2015, showing the locations of koalas, and those green dots show where koalas have either been translocated to or from. So a lot of management of koalas over the years, and we know that they're fairly widespread, but what actually influences their distribution, and are we actually able to predict their distribution and work out which areas might benefit the most from conservation efforts? So the hard part with surveying for koalas is it often takes a long time. So traditional techniques where you're looking for koalas or for koala scat, they're not very effective in actually detecting koalas in a reliable way. So we actually use quite a novel method called bioacoustics to survey koalas and get to a lot more sites than would have been possible had we just been out looking for koalas or their scat. So a student of mine developed this method a few years ago and worked out that all we have to do is put recorders like this one in this photo here, put those out at a site for 7 days, record during the hours 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. and we can be 95% confident that a koala is either absent or present at that site. So that's the approach we took. We also recorded between the hours of 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. to see if we could come up with a noise index. So we were interested in determining how, you know, what sort of human noise impacted some of these sites. And the data that we got from these song meters allowed us to, we scanned them in software to find where koala bellows occurred. And this is a spectrogram showing this is a typical koala bellow, and hopefully you can hear this if I play it. So our method's really good at picking up male koalas at a site, and so we do have to assume that if there's a male there, there may be a female there as well, but they really give us some good information on distribution. And even if you've got some background noise like cicadas or frogs or perhaps a car passing, you can still pick up these bellows. So these are the results. We aimed to survey 130 sites, and 7 of those sites weren't successful. There were issues with the recorders at those. And what we found was there were 39 sites where we detected koalas being present. So it's important to realize this isn't a distribution map. We can't just say, okay, that's our distribution of koalas, because obviously there's a lot more points we could have visited in there, but it does allow us to look at what factors are important for koalas to be at a particular site. So we did some assessments of each of these sites. So we looked at tree cover from aerial photos, and Paula looked for presence of our food tree species, manna-gum, swamp gum, and narrowleaf peppermint, and worked out, you know, percentage cover of those. And we also had our noise index, and there were a whole lot of other things we included as well, but just for keeping this a bit shorter today, I won't go into too much more of the detail there. We also looked at landscape characteristics, because we know it's not just that area within 100 meters of a recorder that influences koala presence. So we drew a radius of 1 kilometer from our site to make this circle here, and we looked at the average forest patch area based on our statewide mapping. We calculated a fragmentation index based on distances between patches. We looked at the percentage of forest cover and total lengths of road. And again, there were a few other things we included that turned out not to have an influence, so I won't go into those today. So here's our results. Things you see in red had a negative influence on koalas occupying a site. What you see in green had a positive influence. So noise, human generated noise combined with fragmentation had an influence on koala occupancy at a site, and I'll talk a little bit about that relationship in a minute. Total forest cover also had a positive influence, and roads had a negative influence. So let's have a look at how they influence koala presence. So the noise one was interesting to us because nobody's actually investigated human noise and koalas before. What we found was that if you've got a lot of human noise in a highly fragmented landscape, like the one pictured here, you almost drop down to a 0 probability of finding koalas. However, if there's not a lot of noise in those landscapes, we have an increase in the probability of a koala being present at those sites. And these dotted lines around it are our confidence intervals. So you can see, you know, there's quite a wide range of, it gets a bit hard to predict once we get into these endpoints here, but certainly an influence of noise. If we look at noise with low fragmentation, you can see it's like a flat line. So there's no influence of noise where we have large forest blocks. So koalas obviously can cope with noise if they've got plenty of big blocks of habitat. So forest cover, this is a bit of a no-brainer really. As you increase forest cover in the landscape, so within a kilometre of a site, you really increase the probability of a koala being able to occupy that site. So I think the big thing to note here is if you look at this, you can double the probability of a koala being present at a site with only a relatively small increase in forest cover when you're around this point. So around the 35% cover, if you can increase that up to about 60% cover, then you really increase the probability of a koala being present. If you've already got about 60% cover, yes, you can continue to increase that probability, but the likelihood is the koala is going to be there anyway. Roads, again, a bit of a no-brainer here. As we move into these highly urbanized areas with lots of roads, you're basically seeing koalas disappear from those areas. Higher probability, of course, where you have fewer roads. So we can take all of this information and then put it into a predictive model of koala presence. So this is in its early stages of development here. There's still a lot of validating and refining to do, and I'd really like to get the resolution of this down to less than 1 kilometre, which is what we've got it at the moment. But we're well on our way to being able to provide something that's fairly high detail. So probably not too many surprises here. As Dirk said before, Green's Bush, nice big patch of habitat. We know we have koalas there. Arthur's Seat, again, we know we have koalas there. Koalas are pretty much absent from down that western coast and certainly out onto the peninsula here. The surprise, I guess, is that Somers and Balnarring Beach came out as low probability of koalas. And this might just simply suggest that it's not a great landscape for koalas there. Yes, they're there. That may be partly due to you know, the history of those locations. It might also be due to the fact that the forests that, or the trees that have been planted in and around Somers and Balnarring Beach aren't showing up on our statewide mapping. But certainly this map shows where we might be able to put in some effort to actually link up some of these bigger forest blocks, or maybe bring back koalas into areas where the habitat's currently not well suited for them. And I do have, Dirk's provided me with access to all of the points that probably a number of you people have reported for koalas on the peninsula. So these are all the points where I was able to get a accurate coordinate for. And again, you can see we do have these clusters around Somers, Balnarring Beach. Mostly though, the points fairly well reflect the distribution that we've predicted, with, you know, maybe some of these ones being influenced by the large forest blocks that are close by. So keep up the good work on sending those points in, because I think they're really going to help us, especially with the validation of this model, and to define where the best places are to put in some conservation effort. So just to summarize all of that, basically, if you want more koalas or want to improve landscapes for koalas, you need forest cover. Big patches rather than a lot of small patches are most important, but that shouldn't stop anybody from starting small and creating small patches. All trees are equally important. We didn't find an influence of food trees at a site, but I would say if you have a choice, plant food trees. Because, you know, that's going to provide koalas with better habitat in the long run. Obviously, development has a negative impact on koalas. So if we see an increase in roads and we see an increase in that human-generated noise, we're going to find that koalas do disappear from some areas. Again, not really something that's surprising to any of us. Koala-friendly driving behaviour is important. We know koalas can move a lot. Just in Somers, 9 hectares for a male is a fairly large area. They're moving on a daily basis, crossing roads a lot. So the more we can do to be aware of koalas on the roads and to adopt koala-friendly driving behaviour, the better. And just as a final point, and I'm just reiterating what Dirk's already said, anything you do for koalas is going to help other wildlife. Koalas rely on trees and big patches of trees especially. The more you can do to promote that, the better it's going to be for a whole lot of wildlife species. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll turn it back to Dirk.
Thanks so much, Leslie. Fantastic presentation as always. Okay, I'll share my presentation again with you. Okay, so I want to finish off just by talking about our group just a little bit. So obviously, we've got our vision and our mission to, work together as a community and, make the Mornington Peninsula sustainable for our wildlife as absolutely possible. So there's two key objectives that we work to. The one, obviously, being awareness. If we don't increase awareness in the community, given that most of the land is on private property, I'm not sure we'll be very successful. So raising awareness is absolutely critical. And obviously restoring habitat, increasing canopy cover, increasing the amount of, available trees and habitat really everywhere, on the Mornington Peninsula is important. So some of our key activities that we're working on sort of this year, and obviously we're starting some planning for next year. We are working with Parks Victoria to restore a paddock at the end of Seamus Drive and Arthur's Seat. We are, coronavirus permitting, we want to run some planting days in June, July, for people to come along and plant trees. But obviously right now that's all up in the air. We're waiting on the state government to announce what is going to happen beyond the 11th of May and whether or not small groups are allowed to plant some trees. Another great thing that happened to us a couple of weeks ago is that actually Vic Roads have donated to us all the tree guards that you see on the Peninsula Freeway at the moment. There's between 5,000 and 6,000 guards there. And if you don't know, during restoration activities, the plants themselves are usually very cheap or often free. A guard can cost us in our group $6, $7, maybe sometimes even $8 a piece. So, to be donated between 5,000 and 6,000 guards is absolutely fantastic. So thank you, Vic Roads. That's amazing. And obviously also they're not going into landfills, so even better. Yes, so look out obviously for some tree planting events. Again, we may only be able to do it in small groups. We just have to wait and see what the state government will allow us to do. We are planning some projects for 2021, possibly around summers. We do know that we want to increase tree cover around the Summers area, knowing that it's a koala hotspot. So stay tuned for that. And if you want to get involved, just email me after this meeting and let me know that you want to be involved in the planning. We always run awareness activities, nature walks. To be honest, the most popular one has been the tree giveaways. So we're planning to increase that and do it more often. As I said before, just a couple of weeks ago, we've given away probably around 700 trees to local residents to plant manna gums and swamp gums. And it's amazing to me, it's the third time that we've done it. And the first time we probably only had about 20 residents. Now we had hundreds of residents asking asking for trees. So the word is obviously getting out there, and our reach on Facebook is extending, which is fantastic. We do nature walks just to get people out and about, and we've done a few of those, and obviously every time I try and find a koala, and so far never have. That's Murphy's Law, I guess. And we were at the Red Hill Show, had a stall at the Red Hill Show, talked to people, koala talks like the one today. We are thinking about running some seed collecting workshops and potentially some tree growing workshops later in the year, because we've got a lot of hobby gardeners who want to get involved and grow koala trees for us, which is fantastic. And we really want to change the community's perception around gum trees and native vegetation, and we need to continuously communicate how important they are. I love when all of you report koala sightings. Lately, there's pretty much not a day where I don't get a sighting reported. To me, it's fantastic. And obviously, we share those details with Desley and her students to overlay with their studies. But please keep reporting koala sightings. And I will give whoever reports the first koala with a joey, with a good photo, I will give you a prize. May just be some caramello koalas or something, but please report koalas to us. And if you can get a photo that I can share on our Facebook page, even better. We are working with authorities, so obviously with Parks Victoria, the Shire has been fantastic. Frankston City Council, has been involved now in the tree giveaway as well. The response from everybody has been, and Vic Roads, so the response from everyone has been fantastic. Couldn't ask for more. We do run our group meetings on the second Sunday of each month. I can see that we've got a lot of our members online, so remember, next Sunday, 2 o'clock is our next group meeting. And we meet monthly to obviously keep things going. Usually we would meet at the Briars in the nice meeting room there, but obviously lately everything is on Zoom. Okay, so what can you do to help? Obviously we need to retain old gum trees. Really, we need to look at old trees as an asset and as absolute irreplaceable assets. Takes you cut an old gum tree down and it may take 50 to 100 years, 1 or 2 generations to get to that same size again. So we need to look at our trees as assets. We need to restore habitat. I did want to point out, I'm going to share some of these links in the PowerPoint because it won't work on Zoom if I open them now. I will share them on chat in a minute. The Shire offers conservation land rate or runs a conservation land rate program with a rate reduction if you revegetate part of your property. If you do have streams or any bodies of water on your property, Melbourne Water may help you do some work there. The Shire also publishes fantastic plant guides, and depending on what area on the peninsula you live in, and so do SPIFA, the Southern Peninsula Indigenous Flora and Fauna Association. They also publish fantastic guides on which plants to plant depending on where you live on the peninsula. So I'll try actually and quickly share those links with you once we're finished with the presentation. Again, what can you do? We've got some fantastic native nurseries on the Mornington Peninsula, and all of them have been absolutely fantastic for our Koala Project, Kylie in the Conservation Collective Nursery, Kate and the team at the Briars, David and the team at Ostplant, and Rowan at Peninsula Bushworks. Everyone's been absolutely fantastic and supportive, so please support our native nurseries. And, you know, to the right there, you can see a lovely stand of little gum trees, and that's just waiting to be planted. Want to leave you with a little bit of an inspirational quote that always resonates with me. So never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So, you know, we can do this, and we will do this, and we will plant lots and lots of trees together over the coming years. Okay, there's our contact details. Again, we're probably the most active on Facebook. I am getting